Hello and welcome to AddingDeveloper.com. Today's video is going to cover adding a custom field to a grid. There's 5 steps to this task. We're going to be creating the custom field in Dynamics, and then we're going to be running the AddingACustomField utility in order to create the modified forms DLL that we'll need to refer to this in code. Then we're going to be populating the field in VS Tools, publishing our code to Dynamics, and then testing our modification. So let's get going. Okay, step 1, like we said, is going to be creating the custom field. For our task today, we're going to put a field in the grid that shows the quantity in one of the customer's warehouses. They want to be able to see this quantity at all times in the grid, so we're going to drop a custom field in there for them. So we're going to go to Customize and then Modify the current window, and that puts us in our design environment. In the design environment, the grid is a separate entity. We have to double click on the grid in order to open it up and be able to edit it. We're going to want to put this field right in this area here, so that means moving these other fields over so that we have room to drop it in. The field itself has a separating line in between it that it's kind of hard to see in this view, but I'll move this field over. I'll make this field smaller and then click here and I'll get the separating line. I'm going to move that over. Click back on the field to make sure I got the field lined up, and I did. Now move the second field over and make it smaller, and we're going to keep on going like that. Okay, I've got these fields all moved over. Now we're going to want to drop our custom field in the grid in this area right here. So in the toolbox, there are several types of fields that might work for us. There's the string field, and then there's the number field, and the currency field. We're going to drop an integer field onto the grid here. Notice that it's got a border around it. So we'll come to our toolbox and fix it. And we'll drop it in position. Now this is an important step. In the Properties box, we're going to click on the Object tab, the Data type, and then we're going to click on the ellipsis. This allows us to give the field a name. We're going to call our field Warehouse Quantity, and everything else is going to be fine, so we'll click OK. Alright, now we're ready to go back to Dynamics, so we're going to save everything, File, and go back to Dynamics. Our next step is going to be to shut Dynamics down and run the AddingACustomField utility. Okay, it's on to part 2 of our project, running the AddingACustomField to create the modified forms DLLs that we need to make our project work. dag.exe itself is stored in the GP10 VS Tools STK folder. Personally, I always move it into the GP2010 folder because it's slightly easier to run there. So I've done that. I've moved it here into this folder. Another thing that I do is I create these bat files to make running it a little easier. Sometimes I run the F file many times in a project, and so it's easier if there's a bat file. There are 2 ways that we need to run the DAG program. One is with the M switch, and the other one is with the F switch. Now, I found that practically speaking, we don't need to run the M switch anymore. It's already done for us, but we used to have to do that. So this bat file right here we're not going to use, so we're just going to close that. We are going to need the F switch. So the 0 parameter in here tells us to run this against the Dynamics dictionary. If we were running it against a third-party dictionary, we would use the number of the third-party dictionary there. The F tells us to build the modified forms DLL, and the N switch tells us to rename it to Dynamics. In my opinion, there's a kind of a disconnect that happened. They renamed Dynamics in the set file, but didn't rename it in VS Tools, so we have to do this little renaming trick in order to get everything to work right. I always put the pause command at the end there so I can see the result of my work. And I'm not going to bore you with running it, but I've already run it, and this is what you get when you run it. In the end, it takes about a minute, and then the output is the application.dynamics.modifiedFormsDLL. If we go into our directory and sort by date modified, these are the two files that just got produced. So, it's on to the third step. Okay, we're on to part 3 of our project, populating the field in VS Tools. The first step, obviously, is going to be to create a VS Tools application. So we do, from Visual Studio 2010, we do File, New Project, and then we choose a Dynamics GP add-in project, we give it a name and a location, and we create a project. The next step is going to be to add a reference to that DLL that we created in the last step, dynamics.modifiedforms.dll. So we set a reference, and then when you create the project, it automatically gives you this GP add-in class. And the way this works is, when Dynamics initializes, this piece of code right here, this initialize, runs. It runs about the same time as you type your name into the login form in Dynamics. So what we do here is we're adding an event handler. So we're registering an event handler with the system. So I've done this as simply as I can. Normally in a project I would separate this out into different classes, but for the sake of the example I put it all in one spot here. So we're going to add a handler to the Dynamics modified dictionary as opposed to the Dynamics dictionary. We'll get to that in just a second. Forms, SOP entry, line scroll, line fill event. When you the line scroll, which is another word for grid, has a bunch of events that fire. Line delete, line enter, line insert, line and like that. So we want to capture the line fill after original event. And when that event fires, we're going to send it to, now this naming convention is because I'm so incredibly original. The SOP entry line scroll line fill after original function, which is right here, or subroutine, I'm sorry, which is right here. Notice the signature of the subroutine. That has to be correct, and you can get it by just mousing over the event itself, and it tells you what signature it expects. Some of them are a little different, so you do have to check each one to make sure you get it right when you create these things. Okay. The first thing we're going to do in our routine here is we're going to get some field values. We're going to get the line item sequence number, because we're going to need that to look up the warehouse value, and the item number. So these are in the standard Dynamics dictionary as opposed to the Dynamics modified dictionary. So Dynamics forms, SOP entry, line scroll, line item sequence. And for the item number, the same thing, Dynamics forms, SOP entry, line scroll, item number. And you can see that there are just a ton of things in here that are to be explored. They're just a little bit out of the scope of what we're talking about now, though. So, after we get our two values here, we're going to do a pseudo database lookup, and we're going to get the warehouse quantity. All I'm really doing here is just getting a random number. But in the real world, we would do a database lookup, a query here. And then we would populate our field. Now, again, we're using the Dynamics Modified dictionary here. So Dynamics Modified, forms, sup entry, line scroll. Now, we named our field warehouse quantity, and our custom fields always come over with the name local. So local warehouse quantity is the name of our field. Value is going to be equal to the warehouse quantity. That's all there is to it. So now we need to build our project. And that's about all the harder that is. Now we're going to publish it and test it. Alright, this is part 4 of our 5-part task. We're copying the files from our development folder into Dynamics. So to begin with, I'm using a tool here called Beyond Compare, which I absolutely love. It allows me to compare two folders and sync the files between them, and it works really well for me in day-to-day production. So on the left-hand side here, we have the Dynamics add-in bin debug folder. That's our development output. On the right-hand side, we have program files, Dynamics, GP2010, add-ins. The add-ins folder is the place where all of our custom code goes. We only need to transfer 3 of these files. These 3 files need to move over to the right-hand side. So I'm just going to right-click and say copy to right, and go, and we are published. Well, we're finally at the last step, which is going to be viewing the results of our handiwork in Dynamics. We've got the sales transaction entry window open. The dot before sales transaction entry tells us that we're looking at a modified form. And that's what we want. We want to be sure that security is set to this form. You can see the custom warehouse quantity field sitting there waiting for us to test it. We'll call up an order, and we'll get data that is populated by our random function, which in real life would be the warehouse quantity. And we are working. Thanks for listening.